Let's talk about one of the most incredible stories in modern history. It's about a man, a true giant in both technology and film, who got kicked out of his own company, only to come back and, well, change pretty much everything for all of us. You know who I'm talking about, Steve Jobs. So let me just ask you this. What would you do? What would you do if the thing you poured your heart and soul into, the thing you built from scratch, rejected you? It's a heavy question, right? Because this story, it's not just about business. It's about failure, it's about pride, and it's about what might just be the greatest comeback story ever told.
To really appreciate the comeback, we have to start at the absolute lowest point. So let's go there. Let's talk about the fall.
Okay, picture this. The year is 1985. Steve Jobs is only 30 years old. He's on top of the world, basically the poster child for Silicon Valley success. And then everything comes crashing down.
After some really intense fights about where Apple was heading, the board of directors did the unthinkable. They fired him. Yeah, fired him from Apple. The company he literally started with Steve Wozniak in his parents' garage. Just gone.
And you can just feel the pain in his own words. He said he felt like a disastrous public failure. I mean, this wasn't just losing a job. This was a humiliation on a global scale. The golden boy of tech had been publicly exiled.
But here's where the story gets really interesting. What happened next is what truly defines his legacy. This decade he spent in the wilderness wasn't the end. Not even close. It was actually a time of incredible, under-the-radar creation.
You know, he could have just given up. Anyone would understand if he did. But instead, he had this realization. He discovered that even after all that failure, he was still in love with the work. He loved making things, and that's all he needed. He decided to start over.
And he didn't just dip his toe back in, he dove in head first, launching two completely different, amazing companies. On one hand, he started Next, a super high-end computer company with a game-changing operating system. And on the other, he bought a tiny little graphic studio from George Lucas that nobody really cared about. That studio was Pixar. So look at how this all lines up. He gets fired in '85, buys Pixar in '86. Then for about 10 years, he's just building. Then bam! 1995, Pixar releases Toy Story and the entire world of animation has changed forever. But at the same time, that nerdy operating system he was perfecting at Next, well, that was about to be his ticket back to Apple. This decade wasn't a failure. It was him forging the very weapons he'd used for his return.
And that brings us to the final act, the one that movies are made of, the Great Return. Because by 1997, Apple, the company that had kicked him out, was an absolute mess. It was literally months away from going bankrupt.
And in this wild twist of fate, Apple gets so desperate that they decide to buy Next, mainly for its advanced software. But of course, with that software came the man who created it. In one of the most ironic moves in business history, Apple brought Steve Jobs back home.
And what followed was just legendary. He didn't just steady the ship, he launched a revolution. First, the iMac in '98, which made computers fun and colorful. Then the iPod in 2001, 1,000 songs in your pocket. And then the big one, the iPhone in 2007, a device that didn't just reinvent the phone, it reinvented modern life itself. So what drove him to do all this? I think this quote says it all. He knew that sometimes life is just gonna smack you down, hard. It's gonna feel like getting hit in the head with a brick. But the secret, he said, is to not lose faith. You just gotta keep going. So when you step back and look at this whole crazy story, what are the big lessons? Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about how the worst thing that ever happened to him turned out to be his greatest gift.
It sounds absolutely insane, right? But he actually said it. Being fired from Apple was the best thing that ever happened to me. And why? Because he explained the crushing weight of being successful was suddenly gone. He was free. He had the lightness of being a beginner again.
And from that beginner's mindset, he developed his core philosophy. It was all about two things: simplify and focus. He realized that genius wasn't about adding more features. It was about stripping things down to their pure essence. And a huge part of that was learning that saying no to 1,000 good ideas was actually more important than saying yes.
But maybe the most powerful lesson of all is this one, the idea of connecting the dots. What he meant was, you can never see how things are going to work out when you're in the middle of it all. You can't connect the dots looking forward. It's only when you look back that you see how every failure, every challenge, every brick to the head was a necessary step on the path to where you ended up.
And really, that leaves all of us with a final thought.
Every struggle you're facing right now, every setback, it's just a dot. It's part of your unique path. So the real question isn't if you'll face challenges. The question is, when you look back one day, how will you connect your dots?